America, U.S. President Donald Trump has backed down from plans to add a citizenship question to the country's 2020 census. Trump has repeatedly said he would fight to insert the question, despite it being blocked by the Supreme Court. Now Trump says he'll instead ask government agencies to provide records to determine a head count of citizens without polling census takers directly.
Today I will be issuing an executive order to put this very plan into effect immediately. I am hereby ordering every department and agency in the federal government to provide the Department of Commerce with all requested records regarding the number of citizens and non-citizens in our country. They must furnish all legally accessible records in their possession immediately. We will utilize these vast federal databases to gain a full, complete and accurate count of the non-citizen population, including databases maintained by the Department of Homeland Security and the Social Security Administration. We have great knowledge in many of our agencies. We will leave no stone unturned.
All right, for more, let's cross to our U.S. correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who joins us live from New York. Welcome, Sherwin. So Trump says he's not backtracking, but many see this as a real retreat because there won't actually be a census question now. What are you hearing?
Well, essentially, the fanfare around the issuing of this executive order or executive action, the president tweeting early yesterday that there was a big announcement to come in the Rose Garden later that day. But the real question we have to ask ourselves is, was it necessary for the head of the federal government to issue an executive order, Francis, basically telling departments under his authority already to release data that they already have? So it begs the question as to why he needed to roll out this sort of fanfare in the Rose Garden, reality TV-esque, which is typical of this administration, for something that he could have just issued quietly. So this was very much an attempt by the administration, along with the Commerce Secretary and flanked by his Attorney General in the Rose Garden yesterday, to spin this in their favor. Remember, Francis, this is not an administration that easily admits defeat. It's not an administration that apologizes or backtracks, in the president's words. But let's listen to what the president had to say a week ago about whether he would be issuing an executive order to include the citizenship question in the census, and then listen to what his Attorney General, standing alongside his principal, had to say in the Rose Garden yesterday.
And the media have been suggesting, in the hysterical mode of the day, that the administration has been planning to add the citizenship question to the census by executive fiat without regard to contrary court orders or what the Supreme Court might say. This has been based on rank speculation and nothing more. As should be obvious, this has never been under consideration. We have always accepted that any new decision to add a citizenship question to the census would be subject to judicial review.
At the beginning of that clip, Francis, there was supposed to be an exchange between a journalist and President Trump at the White House yesterday, where essentially he was asked whether he would use executive fiat to include the censorship question. He said they were looking at that as a possibility and many other options. Of course, the Attorney General yesterday blaming the hysterical media for creating that narrative when in fact it came from his boss.
As shocking as it may be, far-left Democrats in our country are determined to conceal the number of illegal aliens in our midst. They probably know the number is far greater, much higher than anyone would have ever believed before. Maybe that's why they fight so hard. This is part of a broader left-wing effort to erode the rights of the American citizen and is very unfair to our country.
So there you go, Francis. Really, the narrative around this issue, of course, putting Democrats, pro-immigration organizations, and of course the White House and Republicans on opposite sides of this issue.
I was asking Sherwin, remind us why the inclusion of the citizenship question in the census in the first place was so controversial.
Well, what happened here was, certainly from a democratic position or pro-immigrant position, was that an apolitical exercise of counting how many people are in this country, how many people are in different states and cities, that determine the congressional districts, the districts that states determine and send congressional leaders, members of the House of Representatives to Washington. This is what the census was about. And there was a view that by including the citizenship question, Republicans were trying to weaponize this because federal funding, some $900 billion in federal funding, is allocated based on the population sizes in different districts. And the concern certainly expressed from the Census Bureau itself, the apolitical Census Bureau, telling the Trump administration that by including this question, they would be undercutting or undermining the accuracy of the count because minority groups would not show up or would not be honest. And where do you find minority groups by a vast majority in the United States? In districts that are led by Democrats. So if you undercut or undercount people in those districts, federal funds that would have been earmarked for, say, large populations in big districts, they would not get the money that they need for houses. They would not get the money needed for schooling, how many schools in a certain district, hospitals, infrastructure. So there was a federal funding concern here, certainly in Democratic-leaning districts, that by including this census would undercut the number of people showing up or being honest in their responses.
Yeah. All right, so that plays out. But Sherwin, we also learned overnight that singer R. Kelly was arrested in Chicago, new federal charges, child pornography there, the obstruction of justice. This is in addition to the unsealing of a separate indictment in New York. What can you tell us?
Well, it's not been a good year for R. Kelly, certainly. Of course, after that documentary late last year, early this year, Surviving R. Kelly. So essentially, he was picked up last night in Chicago. He was walking his dog after stepping out from his residence in the Trump Tower. Don't let the irony hit you in the face. And the new charges alleging, as you correctly point out, child pornography, obstruction of justice, including allegations that he paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to recover child sex tapes and pressured witnesses to change their stories before his pornography trial that ended with an acquittal in 2008. In addition to the charges, these are federal charges on top of state charges that have now been brought in Illinois, Chicago. There was an indictment in Brooklyn, New York that was unsealed today with 5 new counts this morning. He faces charges of racketeering, essentially that means extortion or coercion, and 4 counts of violating what is known as the Mann, M-A-N-N Act, which prohibits the transporting of people across state lines for the purposes of prostitution. So I imagine that R. Kelly, who has said before that he doesn't have the wealth that he had in the 90s, is going to have to put together a O.J. Simpson-type defense team here because he has multiple charges in multiple districts. So this is going to be a long day and a long week and probably a long couple of years for R. Kelly, Francis.
Sure. Sherwin, final question. So this is the time of #MeToo. Can you just give us a sense of how the celebrity community, how the U.S. community at large has sort of reacted to these gross, serious claims against R. Kelly?
Well, I think it goes beyond just the abuse of women, and you talk about the Weinstein case or the R. Kelly case, Kevin Spacey. They're different cases that are going on. This is about addressing the fundamental and structural inequity that women have faced in the United States and around the world. We can just look at the conversation we've been having this week about the winning U.S. Soccer World Cup team triumphing 2-0 against the Netherlands, their 4th victory, their 2nd consecutive victory. And the conversation very quickly moving to the equity that women, or the inequity that women face around the world, particularly on the question of equal pay for equal work. So there's a broad movement here. It's not just about the sexual and physical abuse that women suffer at the hands of men, but also the structural and social inequities at an economic level that keep women in poverty that also need to be addressed. So this is a global movement. Goal 5 of the SDGs are quite specific on this. It's about implementation, 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 if you believe the likes of Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka.
All right, keeping his eye on U.S. news. Thank you, as always, our correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease.